is the what, why, and how of on-site monitoring. Next slide, please. I'd like to introduce our presenters. First of all, Mark Weinstein. He joined Caveon full-time just over a year ago, and we're so lucky to have him. He brought with him a wealth of investigative and legal expertise. He serves as the Vice President of Caveon Investigative Services. And Mark has a lot of experience conducting all types of investigations regarding exam integrity, including many high-profile investigations in K-12. Steve Adicott is a Vice President at Caveon. He's been with Caveon for more than a decade. Excuse me. And he very much enjoys working closely with his clients and analyzing test security practices and helping them build a strong test security protocol to best protect their program and, most importantly, their reputation. So those are our experts who will be presenting to you today, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Steve.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. I am very pleased to be part of this session today. First, because I feel that this content and that site monitoring programs are so critically important as part of an overall test security strategy. And second, that I get to present with Mark Weinstein, who may have more experience with implementing site monitoring programs of K-12 test programs than anyone else in the country. And so with that in play, here's what we want to cover today. Our agenda is really addressing these questions. First, what the heck is a site monitoring program? And why would anyone want to actually implement such a thing? So those are key aspects we're going to address. Third, if it's important to my district, how would we go about implementing such a program? And lastly, what kind of information does the program yield, and how is that useful to us? So before we go any further, Mark, do you want to kind of set the stage from your perspective of what we're tackling today?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think what we're looking at here is how can we ensure integrity, the integrity of assessments that we're going to use to make important decisions. And, you know, districts and local education agencies can really demonstrate their commitment to the integrity of their state assessments by conducting monitoring. Wouldn't you rather find out during testing that there's a problem and something that you can address rather than lose a bunch of test scores or have a story hit the papers a few weeks or months later that there was a serious breach that you didn't know about? So monitoring is a great way to be proactive in protecting your program and demonstrating your integrity, you know, to the process.
Perfect. Next slide, please. Thank you, Mark. And next slide, please. So what is, next slide, there we go. What is a on-site monitoring program? Well, we're talking about having trained personnel, trained is key, who are armed with appropriate tools, actually heading out, visiting schools, and observing what happens in testing rooms. Really, what this means is it's a district's way to trust but then verify what is going on out in the field during administrations of state assessments. Now, that's sort of what on-site monitoring is, but why would I want to do this? So next slide, please. First and foremost, site monitoring programs are an added arrow in your test security quiver to help ensure test score validity. We spend so much time, so much effort, so many dollars creating, administering, scoring, and reporting these high-stakes exams. There's so much riding on the decisions that are made based upon these scores. This is an important aspect to ensure trustworthy test results. Also, the program yields very illuminating information around your training programs, quality assurance around your processes and procedures, how well are they working, how well have they been implemented, and how can we get better when it comes to administering state assessments. And finally, the most recent peer review requirements and guidance specifically call out for states and districts to conduct site monitoring in Section 2.4. So this kind of program can be very important for peer review compliance too. And I think we've got a poll now just to kind of set the stage for the rest of the webinar. Michelle, would you please take over and conduct the poll?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're just wondering who in the audience today is currently monitoring classrooms during high-stakes testing. You can just go ahead and click on your screen to vote. The choices are yes, no, and only in special cases. We'll give you just a moment or two to vote. Okay, looks like about 80% of you have voted. I'll give you a little bit more time. Okay, like the majority of votes are in. I will go ahead and share those results with you all. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, oh, that's excellent. Mark, any reaction to this?
Well, it's gratifying to see that so many of the, such a significant percentage of the participants in this webinar already have monitoring programs that include monitoring testing in classrooms. The percentage is a little higher than what I expected, so that's great. I think a lot of the participants on this call already understand the important reasons to conduct monitoring.
Certainly. So now let's get, well, actually, before we get into the nuts and bolts, next slide, please. Mark, do you have a perspective on why your clients have implemented site monitoring programs?
Yeah. I'll give you an example of a specific district, a recovery school district in New Orleans, Louisiana. It came out that in 2015, state assessment administrations, following some tips in 2 separate charter schools in New Orleans, there were some serious irregularities that were investigated by the Office of the Inspector General, and it was determined that there were some serious problems with testing at 2 schools, again, 2 separate charter management organizations. So after this happened, leading up to the spring assessments in 2016, all of the leaders, the local leaders of the charter management organizations in New Orleans came together and said, look, this does not look good for us. We are going to do something to demonstrate our commitment to the integrity of state assessments. And, they understood that it has an impact on their accountability. So they committed to conducting third-party monitoring in all the charter schools throughout the Recovery School District in New Orleans. And monitoring took place at over 50 schools at all the state assessments in 2016. And Caveon led that project. And, they were able to really understand what's happening in the classrooms in each of the schools. And the statistics from monitoring showed that they had compliance in 97% of classrooms throughout the city of New Orleans. And I'd say, that's fantastic. So I think they accomplished their goal of demonstrating their commitment to the integrity of the process. And I think everyone in all those schools stepped up to the plate knowing that they were going to be monitored and did a great job administering the assessments. So I think that's the type of success story that really illustrates the benefits of monitoring.
Well, and that's a terrific segue, Mark, actually, for what we want to tackle next in talking about nuts and bolts, what happens during on-site monitoring. And at the outset of this program, next slide please, there's some key decisions to be made. And that is, well, I think this slide is a little misguiding because for sure, just as Mark outlined, you want to broadcast that you're instituting a site monitoring program. But what we're talking about here, should we announce the monitoring, is really, should the monitoring be scheduled or should it just be sort of, hey, we're showing up? And there's advantages and disadvantages to both. The advantage is that for having an announced monitoring is that people are going to put their best foot forward. And it can be really telling if a school staff knows that monitors are arriving this morning and there are still significant lapses in policies and procedures. Boy, that's very illuminating. The negative is that you're going to have the best foot forward and you may not have as clear a picture of what happens day in and day out. Next slide, please. With unscheduled or unannounced visits, this is your best way to really trust but verify, to really understand what's going on inside the classrooms, inside the schools. The negative here is that, hey, we're talking about a very stressful time of year for everybody, staff, proctors, teachers, students. Do we really want to throw another stressor on them? So, Mark, what's sort of your perspective on announced versus unannounced visits?
Well, we strongly recommend to all of our clients that what they do is conduct unannounced visits, but message to all the stakeholders in the community that unannounced monitoring could take place on any given day during the testing window. So in other words, they should be prepared, they within the schools, test administrators, test coordinators, proctors, they should be prepared to be monitored on any day, so they should always have their best foot forward, and that should reduce the amount of stress. And by not announcing the specific day that monitors show up, you do get a clearer picture of what's happening in that school at the time of monitoring.
Very good. Thank you. Let's move to the next slide, please. So during site monitoring, our monitors are going to try to gain a picture of what happens before, during, and after the administration, looking at the entirety of the testing day. Want to look at training logs, want to look at any proctor agreements and make sure that those pieces of information are in place and stored accordingly. Want to gain a sense of how any sensitive materials, whether physical or electronic, are handled, who has access, where are those things stored, what kinds of logins are required from different roles involved in testing, whether it's the student or the proctor. And this is key. We're not just showing up at the school. The monitors are going to be inside the testing room. And then at the conclusion of testing, how do things wind down? Again, sensitive materials, where are they stored? How are they handled? Those kinds of things. So next slide, please. In addition to looking at the entire day, the monitors are going to focus squarely on processes and on people. And by people, looking at the various roles and how those roles are interacting with each other and how appropriate those interactions are. And it's not just staff, it's also students. How are students interacting with each other, with leadership, with proctors, and with their exams inside the testing room? And I know, Mark, I love this anecdote you've got. Do you mind sharing what you saw with students engaged in their testing?
Sure. Yeah, we've worked with a number of clients who have asked us to review and consider revising their monitoring processes. And one example that perfectly illustrates the importance of having monitors go inside the testing room during testing sessions is a situation where our client had essentially a 3-page audit form that they required monitors to use, and that was in place for at least 10 years when they brought us in to evaluate their process. And we actually went along with our client to conduct monitoring at certain schools. And their process did not allow monitors to go inside the testing room under their 3-page audit form. So along with us, they went ahead and adopted our recommendations and put monitors into the testing rooms. I was one of the monitors who went into the testing rooms. And I can tell you, when we went into this one particular high school during state assessments, we saw students not attending to the test. These students and the monitors sat in this room for 15 minutes. They were not making any effort whatsoever to answer questions on the test. Some of them were looking up at the ceiling during the test. Now, when monitors left the room, what we saw was, monitors would go back and sort of peek around the window and the door to the room, and then saw what appeared to be coaching behavior between the proctor and the students. And one other important point is when the monitors were in the room, they saw the students looking to the proctor, and you can't hear what people are saying, but if you could read their minds, all of their eyes, all the students' eyes were saying, help. In other words, they were accustomed to being coached, and they knew they couldn't be coached while monitors were in the room. And the only way that our client was going to figure that out was by being present in that room.
Thank you, Mark.
Steve?
Thank you, Mark. Very compelling. Next slide, please. So one of the things we talk about quite a bit when it comes to site monitoring is consistency and rigor. Because that is so critical, because consistency and rigor are so critical, we spend a great deal of time working with our clients to create tools to support the monitoring effort. These are checklists. Think of a pilot in a jetliner. Before, during, and after flights, they use checklists to make sure they're hitting every mark, that nothing is being missed. Same thing for our monitors. And just like a pilot, our monitors need to undergo very comprehensive training to make sure they are gathering information consistently, rigorously, appropriately. In addition to kind of yes-no checklists, we want to have a means of gathering narrative, subjective narrative information, essentially the monitor's perspective of what a particular situation or irregularity involves. And then all of that must be gathered in a way that the information can be archived and then used for reporting purposes for various stakeholders. So it's not an insignificant amount of data collection. It's actually rather a huge amount of data collection just from one school. You can imagine, next slide please, if we're going in and we're monitoring 60 schools in a period of a week or so, it's a huge, huge stockpile of data. So one of the things that we've developed is an online software tool to help monitors ensure consistent, rigorous data collection. And think of it from their standpoint, they don't have to write on hard copy and then enter in separately. In the schools, they're using tablets or smartphones to collect information systematically. In real time, district leaderships have access to all of this information, can run different analytics, can run reports. We can build if-thens for different kinds of incident management workflows with permissions. And then all the information is made much more readily available for reporting purposes for various stakeholders. Now, Mark, we had a challenge with implementing that electronic data collection, didn't we? Could you describe one dynamic there, please?
Sure. I'm sure the obvious reaction of everyone listening to this is, well, how can you have an electronic device in the testing room? That right there is a violation of our state policies and procedures, as it should be for most. And when we recently encountered this on behalf of a local education agency client, we went to the state that LEA sits in and discussed with their assessment folks about this particular rule. Now, within their rule in the state that I'm talking about, there was an exception for devices that were required to be in the room as part of technical assistance in administering the test. And essentially, what the state did was they interpreted that rule to allow the use of electronic tablet devices by a third-party independent monitor who would be monitoring state assessments. So that was the interpretation of that particular rule in the one state I'm referring to. And point of clarification, I will say the state does not want us using iPhones, even though the platform is capable of being accessed on iPhones and Samsung phones and all kinds of handheld devices. They want tablets that are clearly dedicated for the purpose of monitoring and no other purpose. And so that's what we're doing in that one particular LEA and state.
Yeah, it's definitely a quickly emerging area for districts. So thanks for that perspective. So we've talked about before monitoring, kind of the why and the what it is, and then during. What about after on-site monitoring? Next slide, please. Well, data, perhaps most significantly, we encounter situations that represent an itch, and sometimes that itch must be scratched. Sometimes we're going to identify some situation that requires additional follow-up, perhaps an investigation, perhaps additional training, that kind of thing. Another key consideration is what information should be returned back, should be shared back with school leadership. And also as part of this whole consideration of data collected and shared, it could be the case that much of this information gathered is subject to Freedom of Information Act or other kinds of sunlight laws. So if information gathered is going to be publicly available, how does that impact what we collect and how? Next slide, please. The information collected through monitoring is yet another data point involving your overarching test security system. And we've seen it be a very powerful tool to couple or triangulate with other data elements, for instance, tip lines, perhaps a whistleblower, irregularity reports, or statistical analysis of test data, what we call data forensics. So maybe data forensics indicates some possible irregularities in a particular school. So we want to send the monitors there and see what they are able to uncover. Also lets us measure one school's monitoring performance and compliance against other schools. And again, just kind of gain a sense of overall, how are we doing from the test security standpoint. Next slide, please. Kind of talked about 3 of these points, but once you've got the data, now you're able to take various kinds of action. Able to, really the last piece here is the most important. You've got some real data by which you can focus on improvement. Improving our policies, improving our procedures, improving our training, improving our materials, etc. So, next slide, please. We've talked before, during, and after. How do I get started? What's my first step? Well, next slide, please. We're going to ask you to focus on your goals. What are we trying to achieve here? Yes, trustworthy test results. But are we interested in quality assurance? Are we interested in ensuring compliance? Are we looking at how effective are our training systems? So those are all very important things to consider. And also, what are my resources? What funding do I have? What kind of capital, human capital, do we have available to actually conduct this work? And again, what are we going to use the data for? To what purpose? Mark, I think you've got another perspective on the goals here.
Well, it's really a bookend to the earlier comment that I made, which is, if you want to demonstrate your commitment as a district or a local education agency, you want to demonstrate transparency and commitment to the integrity of your accountability processes. This is a really strong way to do it. And, really from a protective standpoint, in terms of protecting the reputation of your district and your LEA, again, would you rather find out about problems in your testing program when you get a call from a reporter 2 hours before the reporter is about to publish a story about a serious test security violation? Or would you rather figure out what's going on your own with the assistance of professionals and work to remedy any potential issues before it turns into a serious problem?
Thank you very much, Mark. I'm looking at the clock. Next slide, please. When it comes to implementing your own program, as a thank you for your participation today, we are sending you this resource document, 6 steps to implement an effective site monitoring program. We list them here. Next slide, please. But because we're sending you more detail, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. In addition to these 6 steps, there are some other important considerations. Next slide, please. As Mark indicated when we started, there's an opportunity here for you to really turn your program into a public relations opportunity. So consider your communication plan for not just internal, but also external stakeholders, including the public. And staffing is key. Mark, who are the right folks to be doing this work in the district?
We really strongly believe that you need objective, independent monitors. So we would encourage the use of third parties, meaning people who are not regular employees of the district, to conduct monitoring, and critically, people who are trained extensively in how to conduct the monitoring in a fair and objective and thorough manner.
Thank you, Mark. So with just a couple of minutes left in our half-hour window, we'd like to open this up to questions. And we can stay a little bit longer if your schedule allows, attendees. And are there any questions from folks out there, Rochelle?
Yeah, I do have a couple. And please, if you have a question, go ahead and enter it in the question box. Even if we don't get to it today, we'll make sure we answer those in our follow-up email to you. Okay, so this one's probably for Mark. So how many people should typically conduct monitoring at one time?
Well, our recommendation is to use 2 monitors at each site. Usually schools, when they conduct high-stakes assessment testing, will have a number of classrooms testing at the same time. And the only way to get a clear snapshot in one day of what's happening is to monitor testing in multiple rooms. And the only way you can really, you can't be in 2 places at once, but if you have 2 people, you can literally cover twice as many classrooms in a school. And we have strongly advocated to our clients for the use of monitoring pairs at each school.
Okay, thank you. Another question, how do I find out about the software tool you mentioned today?
Oh, this is Steve. I'll take that. If anyone wants to learn more about Caveon Core, it's a site monitoring and test security incident management tool. We'd love to fill you in a little bit. We will be sending out emails, and if you just reply to Rochelle, she can definitely put channels to learn more. And I think we're at the end of our time.
We are. Steve, we did just have one question come in. If you need to go, we certainly understand. You can hang up now and look for that recording and such from me. But Steve, I'm going to go ahead and give you this one. What is the appropriate amount of time to provide feedback, if necessary, to the test center regarding the findings of the on-site visit?
I'll defer to Mark on that.
Okay.
So, in other words, the amount of time after the test event, Rochelle, is that the question?
I think so. Yeah, we can clarify that.
Okay. So, you know, I would say it depends. Sorry to give you a wishy-washy answer. But for example, in the program that I mentioned in New Orleans, it was very important to local education leaders that the message went out before the end of the school year to everyone in the community what the results of monitoring were. So, you know, those results were made publicly available, I think, within a week before the last day of school. So it would be roughly within, you know, for their state testing window, it was roughly within 30 days of the last day of the testing window.
Mark, what about when monitors found sort of a really egregious breach of policy? What was the situation there?
Well, I mean, protocols vary from state to state and from, you know, district to district, but one example I can think of involved a test administrator in a room who appeared to be engaged in coaching conduct during testing. And so essentially, you know, monitors are not there to conduct investigations. They're there to gather data and write down their observations. And so that was reported up the chain, and clearly an irregularity was observed, and the district was required to conduct an investigation, and did conduct an investigation in that instance, and invalidated certain test scores, and the test administrator, you know, received additional training. And, you know, beyond that, I'm not sure if anything else happened to the test administrator, but the bottom line is an investigation was conducted.
Interesting. Very good. Well, we have bumped up on our half hour. We want to thank everybody for taking time out of very busy schedules to join us. We want these to be very useful and helpful. So if you have feedback you're willing to share with us, please feel free to do so. It's truly welcome. And we look forward to seeing you at our next school district series webinar, where I believe the topic is going to be conducting investigations. So until then, here's to a great spring of testing, and we look forward to seeing you next time.